Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ACMA webinar, Medical Affairs Leadership. Our discussion today is the next installment in the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs ongoing research on maximizing the value of medical affairs activities and communicating that value to all of our stakeholders, both internal and external to the company. We have two great speakers today. Dr. Mark Tennyson is a senior medical affairs executive and a member of the board for ACMA Asia. He's held leadership positions in several international biopharma companies and with a focus on Asia Pacific. He most recently undertook a rotation of senior leadership roles in Hong Kong and Japan for Amgen as regional head of medical, general manager and president for Japan, and regional head of value, access, and policy. Dr. Tennyson trained in medicine at the University of London and currently holds general and specialist registration as a physician in Australia. Our second presenter today is Dr. Maya Sharma. Dr. Sharma currently serves as Global Medical Director for Modi Group, which includes Win Medicare, Modi Mundi Pharma, and Signutra. She has almost 20 years of experience across the healthcare sphere, including clinical, pharmaceutical, nutrition, and medical device experience at AstraZeneca, Abbott, and Philips. She is also a member of the ACMA Asia board. Dr. Sharma has learned and worked in a number of different countries, providing her with an appreciation for the operational and cultural nuances of different regions around the world. After finishing her medical training, she completed advanced degrees in clinical research and international business. Before we begin our discussion with Dr. Sharma and Dr. Tennyson, I want to introduce my colleague, Yue Hu. Yue is the ACMA's Director of Engagement for Asia, and I know many of you have spoken and worked with her previously. Yue, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I think we have a truly insightful webinar lined up, and I'm excited to hear from Maya and Mark. I do want to take a moment and discuss the ACMA's role in advocating for medical affairs. Many of you who are familiar with the ACMA know us from our work in building the BCMAS program, the world's first and only accredited certification program for medical affairs professionals. Over the last 5 years, we have worked with thousands of professionals in over 70 countries to test and certify their medical affairs capabilities. At the heart of all our work is establishing the global standards for medical affairs skills and professional ethics. We also came to understand that medical affairs teams need their own tools, and it's not just adapted from commercial side. So ACMA Engage is our new medical CRM platform. Engage was built from the ground up for medical affairs. It's designed to be user-friendly while reflecting the real-world workflow for field medical information, medical communications, and medical affairs management. It's designed to deliver the most value to your KOLs while also capturing medical insights. ACMA Predict is our new predictive analytics platform. It uses our machine learning system to give you actionable insights of KOLs' needs and preference. Engage and Predict are two parts of our growing suite of medical affairs service. If you're interested in learning more, please be in touch with me after this webinar. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Mark Tennyson.
Hello, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you about something that's very dear to my heart, and that is the future of medical affairs. Now, as Adam said, I've been working in medical affairs for a long time in country, regional, global roles. But I've also worked, as Adam mentioned, in market access. I've also been a GM. So I've sort of seen medical from the other side, as it were. And I would like to talk to you about the way I see the future. And perhaps the most critical thing and the most critical skill set that I see medical affairs professionals need to have as we move forward. But first, let me talk a little bit about ACMA in Asia. So ACMA is new to Asia in 2020. And that's why they asked Maya and myself to join their Asia board to advise on how to introduce their programs in standards and best practices for medical affairs around the region. Now, ACMA is differentiated. They're not a professional association. Their focus is programs for accreditation, programs for board certification. So it's different. And actually, over 100 medical affairs professionals have already picked up the program so far across the region, which is great. The mission is standards, best practices, but critical to it, of course, is partnerships. And ACMA have been working on their partnerships with CMAC, the China Medical Affairs Congress, and in other countries. And in India, we've already seen their programs taking off as a bridge for professionals coming from the academic and clinical world into a commercial organization. So partnerships, as I say, are critical, and ACMA is working on those because at the end of the day, we can set standards together. And I guess that leads me to pose the question, well, why all of this? What's the issue? And that is the subject of this webinar and hopefully future webinars. And I've seen a lot of different medical affairs functions over the years, but never before have I seen such high expectation from internal leaders and functions and externally too. The expectations are rising, and never before has it been so important for medical affairs professionals to own that, and also to own the advancement of their own careers. And it comes down to one thing: the role of medical affairs is continuing to evolve. We'll be involved with building ecosystems and partnerships that have patients at the center. And this is a change. So never before has the demands on medical affairs as leaders, never before has it been so high. So next slide, please. So there are some powerful forces at play out there in the world, shaping healthcare and shaping what we do in medical affairs. If we look there on the left first, patient-focused technology. This is massive, from screening, diagnosis, devices designed in a much more patient-centric way, so they fit into patient lives. Digital healthcare, health technology is going to be at the center of this. And healthcare professionals are going to be increasingly connected as the digitalization of healthcare continues. Artificial intelligence, massive. Advanced rapid cycle and real world data analytics. And this was a critical point that'll keep coming up. And genetic information, it's already here. It's just not widely adopted, but it's going to focus healthcare systems on prevention much more. Public healthcare goals are changing. They're changing rapidly. And we're seeing the reemergence with COVID of infectious diseases as a priority. But we're also seeing the spotlight on chronic diseases, because it's patients with chronic diseases in whom we need to predict and prevent the serious sequelae of COVID. So predicting and preventing secondary events is also going to be under the spotlight, as are economic conditions. I mean, we're in the middle of a massive upheaval economically, and the world can't afford another COVID. But budgets are going to be tight, and they're going to stay tight for years. So it's not going to be just about pivotal clinical trials and clinical trial populations. It's going to be about the medical economic, social, and humanistic value of new technologies from the perspective of different stakeholders. The regulatory environment is also evolving. I mean, we have an incredible mission here as the biopharma industry. And it's an incredible mission that impacts patients' lives around the world. But we're only allowed to do that if we are compliant with the regulatory environment. So savviness on the risk and compliance framework as it evolves with the evolving environment is going to be critical. So these are the powerful factors, or just some of them, that are driving change. If we go on to the next slide, medical affairs has evolved a lot over the years. I go back to the 1990s. It's evolved a lot, and it's evolving now faster than ever before. I started in the field of HIV/AIDS back in the 1990s, and I started in medical legal approval and clinical research protocols. Very rapidly, it became about much more than that. It became about the patient, about advocacy, about policy, about multiple different stakeholders and access, and how do we articulate value. And what I've seen over the years is this broader focus being reflected in different therapeutic areas as new technologies come to market. Around 2010, medical affairs became much more engaged with partnering externally with groups like medical associations, so that in partnership we could communicate scientific communications and the scientific data. And that isn't going away. And more recently, as technology and products and medicines become more complex and the biology becomes more complex, we're seeing the better integration of medical affairs into clinical development. And we're seeing the better engagement earlier before launch on how to prepare the healthcare ecosystem for the new technology. And no longer is it about bringing a new antihypertensive to the clinic. It is how do we weave these new technologies and evolve the healthcare system to be best able to deliver the value they offer for patients. And if we look to the future, and of course we're already in the future, medical affairs is evolving to become a catalyst. And the word catalyst is interesting and probably needs a conversation of its own. But I'm absolutely convinced medical affairs is the catalyst for patient-centric, multi-stakeholder partnerships, whereby health systems will be evolving. And along with those stakeholders, we in medical affairs will be taking a seat at the table to engage and share our knowledge about how health systems needs to evolve. So we're seeing medical affairs evolve. I see now medical affairs taking its rightful place as a bridge builder internally. And this is a shared graphic from McKinsey, and I think they capture it quite nicely. I also refer to it as medical affairs as the third leg of the stool with R&D and the commercial organization. And this third leg of the stool is a bridge builder from what is done in development, which are pivotal clinical trials and trial populations. But then how do we bring that into the real world? And how do we measure the real world impact? How do we provide the leadership internally so that those strategies are developed and initiated and executed? And that needs massive communication skills, bridging the two organizations, development and commercial. It needs technical skills to develop new tools, but it also puts a demand on leadership. And medical affairs as a leader internally and externally is really what this bridge builder role is really all about. Next slide, please. So the past, the present, and the future. Medical affairs has a changing mandate. In the past, it's really been a support function for other parts of the organization, managing key opinion leaders and providing scientific information, often reactively, on request. Now that is changing into what is now going on. Next slide. And we see in the present a much broader role, deeper involvement with development, portfolio management, data analysis, and key strategies that go beyond opinion leader management. Medical affairs now has its own mandate, and it's critical to support patient outcomes and support the development of the business as well. And the requirements are substantial. So as we move from the present into the future, and I've been talking about the past, I'm going to hand over for the future to Maya to talk a little bit about what particular skill sets we're going to need as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Mark. I would say that change is the law of nature, and science is in fact evolving much faster than nature, because we are not only resolving the unsolved mysteries, but we are creating so much with the help of science. Similarly, medical affairs has to evolve to be future ready. We have to be prepared for this future leading vision of medical's role, and medical leadership must shift radically. It is long time, I would say approximately 2 decades that we have been slow and steady. Now is the time that we should become the lighthouse for the whole pharma industry, give them direction, become the spearhead, and lead the change. For that, medical leaders will need creativity and flexibility to manage a truly integrated view of how medical affairs impacts the healthcare system. Again, we have realized that typically medical used to sit in their own cabins and chambers, and they used to give inputs only when asked for. From that mode, now we have to move into a more creative and proactive mode, where we are telling them about the patient-centric values, how we can benefit through our innovations and products, and how we can talk about more of solutions and outcomes, and rather than just the treatment part of it. Medical affairs will build external partnerships, shape clinical practice through medical strategic plans, nurture talent to meet the expanding demands also. So when we talk about external partnerships, it will not just be restricted to the KOLs, or I would say the doctor bodies and societies, but also we have to take a giant leap towards patients, towards the patient support groups and bodies, doctors and governments, the payers, insurers. And that way we will be able to bridge a huge gap and do the right kind of expectation setting. When we talk about shaping the clinical practice, so whatever we are doing should be able to help change the guidelines so that it is benefiting the patients. So until unless all the clinical evidence that we generate through the clinical trials, through the evidence-based studies, the RWE studies will make no sense. Just having trials and talking about the data is not of much value until unless it is changing the treatment paradigms. Also important is nurturing talent to meet expanding demands. Again, I have seen that medical affairs teams crib and they get frustrated that there are so many programs running for the sales and marketing teams in terms of just capability building, leadership development, change management, project management, and typically medical affairs is not a part of these. But I think it's high time to stop expecting and lead that movement. So if we can engage our own teams and demand that there should be capability building exercises, more trainings, cross-functional exposure for our teams, and a proper expectation setting, that is how we can nurture talent. And I would say there is a shift which has been seen in medical devices when they hire a lot of doctors into marketing and higher roles. Pharma needs to catch up on that front. Oops, can I have? Yeah. So for that, there are 6 keys for future successes. There are 6 key areas which are emerging where the medical affairs professionals must master. And I'm going to highlight master, not just be aware of, because it is all around us, it's happening. but we need to master and take full control of these to successfully engage with a more diverse set of stakeholders. A greater focus on patient outcomes and experiences will be of paramount importance across all these areas. The first being digital tools. And I would say that even before these, we have to keep patient centricity at the heart of all we do. So whatever new product or services we are coming up with, we need to understand that it has to make the patient's life better. So when we talk of digital tools, what's the big deal about it? I mean, all of us possess the iPads and the tabs and the computers. But then it is important that how effectively are we using these digital tools? Are they helping us get closer to our consumers and customers, whether it is helping us bridge the gap with them? And that brings me to the next key factor for success, which is personalized communication. So with this advent of technology and the armamentarium of tools available, are we personalizing our communication such that it is different for doctors, more, I would say, in a layman language for the patient, it is easy to understand, it makes more economic sense for the payers, and that ways we'll be able to gain their trust, which is of important this thing. And then with that brings me to the next one, which is evidence generation. When we talk of evidence generation, we understand that medical affairs plays a key role in phase 3 of clinical trial, in the initial pre-launch and launch phase, where whatever existing data is available, we are able to leverage that science and launch the products in a scientific manner. And then we talk about the post-marketing surveillance study, the observational studies, which can be case studies, case series, the real-world evidence studies, the HEOR studies, etc., and also the pharmacovigilance studies. So all that evidence generation has to happen, but importantly, it should bring us to evidence generation and insight generation. So there is data which is available, evidence has been generated. Now, how do we turn this into insights so that it can give us strategic direction for more personalized action, which is directed to patients? So that way we'll be able to help with that with the help of scientific and value communication. So there is data available. Now, how you turn that science into value proposition, whether it is for the doctors, whether it is for the patients. And for all that, we need to acquire soft skills. So it's good to have the hardcore scientific skills, but soft skills, when we know that having knowledge is important, but how do we impart that knowledge is, I would say, something which is gaining importance, and we all should not shy away from even taking the help of the experts on this front. Next slide, please. So there are new skills which can help to improve patient outcomes. The range of these skills are needed to meet the growing demands of medical affairs work, which range from cutting edge technology to nuanced interpersonal negotiation. All these areas, whether it is traditional and new, will be reshaped to focus on adding value to the patient. And some of these skills include advanced analytics. How today can we leverage artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., into generating evidence, collating, aggregating the data, cleaning up the data, and how can it help us in predictive analysis and customizing treatment for these patients? Secondly, advanced outcomes research, whether it is the economic or population health modeling, and how can we help this data to make sure that we are having customized solution and we are streamlining reimbursement models with the help of this. And the third one is, again, the new communication and the virtual engagement tools. I would say this is the new normal. There is no looking back. It's only how we can lead these to a win-win situation for all. Next slide, please. And for that, we need to understand and magnify the patient voice in medical strategy. I'll highlight the word magnify here. So again, patient centricity has already become the buzzword, but are we really involving the patients, as a writer? Are we just restricting ourselves to generating insight from doctors, or are we really reaching out to the patients? Can we help these patients to become the authors? Can we have publications in the patient's voice? And can we also help in delivering partnerships overall? So when we talk about partnerships, typically it has been restricted to the internal partnerships with the sales teams and the marketing teams. And outside it has been the doctors and doctor bodies. But now, can we partner with, I would say, non-competing organization, which has the common goals? We can do any of the events, whether it is studies or conferences, and half the cost, and we both can achieve our targets, whether it is scientific in nature or whether it is commercial in nature. So integrating different partnerships into a new ecosystem is the need of the hour, and personalized and data-driven KOL communication. And with this, I would like to highlight again that medical affairs typically was looking into partnering with the HCPs, the healthcare professionals, the key opinion leaders, the doctors, at times maybe the nurses and the paramedical staff, and in internal, it's marketing, sales, training, etc. But more and more, it has to be now with the regulatory bodies. When you understand what are their requirements, what kind of data is available for us, and how we can convince the regulatory bodies, and what more data is required, to establish our science. At the same time, there is a need of real world evidence and health economics and outcomes research to convince the payers on why a certain molecule is better than the existing molecules, and why it makes commercial sense, and it can lead to a quick access to medications and streamline reimbursement, etc. So we need to connect with the tech providers as well. There are so many startups which are working into the health tech arena, and there are companies, not just, I would say, medical devices, but pharma, which are conducting regularly the hackathons. They are partnering with these small startups, where they bring in the knowledge of the tech, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and predictive analysis. And with that, how we can use it in designing the pharma models for, again, better patient outcomes. And some of the examples here I would like to quote is like wearable devices, like a smart watch, which can show a ECG. In fact, if required, you can note that ECG and send it to a cardiologist if you're a cardiac patient or a hypertension patient, and immediately the doctor can let you know that whether it is a normal ECG or whether it requires some kind of a medical intervention. Similarly, for diabetes, now there are continuous glucose monitoring devices available, which can alarm you or your near and dear ones or the doctors, and it can immediately change your prescription or whatever intervention that is required. Also, I would say that not just restricted to the doctors, alarming the doctors and the change in intervention. In fact, there are smart devices and I would say patient apps which are available, which work on game theories. It has been again seen, and it is just started in some of the niche areas like in diabetes. But then, one of the doctor colleagues in the pharma was sharing that how they develop game theories for diabetes patients. In most of the chronic diseases, there is a lot of fatigue which is observed, and patients start kind of neglecting their medications. They are like, oh my god, it has to be taken lifelong. But then if instead of just saying that this is something to control your sugar levels, if we can engage them on a higher level and tell them that if you take your pill on time and monitor that on this app, we will be generating a certain amount of money and you will be donating it for somebody's benefit, something like that. So, or you say that you are competing against a few hundreds or few thousand of other patients, and we'll see that whose sugar level, is coming into normal within a specific time period. So then when you are in a competition mode, you pay more attention and you become more stringent in managing your sugar levels with the help of medications. And with this, a lot of artificial intelligence studies and data and publications are now being created. So this is how, by designing new ways and means, we can be connecting with different players in our healthcare ecosystem. Yeah, so that was all from my side. I'll request Adam and our audience if they have any questions.
So yes, we have several questions coming in. First question is, in what ways will field medical change the most over the next 5 years?
Okay.
Maya, I'll ask you first.
Okay, sure, great. So I can say with my personal experience, I've myself worked as field medical. So I can say that going forward, there is going to be a lot of digital adoption and virtual interaction. And we are witnessing, that it is happening at a faster pace during Corona times, because we are all in the lockdown. So virtual interaction on top of the face-to-face interaction is going to increase. There is going to be a lot of focus on soft skills and communications, more insight generation from the field, because these are the people who are interacting directly with the KOLs. So these are the major touch points. These are the ones who are bridging the gap between the organization, whether it is R&D or HO medical, and the doctors. So that's how whatever are the doubts in the market regarding therapy, or if there are any issues regarding the adoption of the therapy in the market, these field medical people are the ones which are going to bring those insights to the HO for making a better strategy, for more adaptable strategy. And these are the ones who are going to drive access and value conversation, with all the other stakeholders as well. At the same time, in case of real world studies, again, they will play a pivotal role in identifying these KOLs, or maybe some patient subsets, whether it is pregnancy, lactation, children, elderly, some other subset of cardiac or diabetic patients, etc. And here it is not just going to be data done from them. I think they are going to be more strategic player in terms of designing the clinical trials as well, because they are getting the hang of how it is all, phasing out there in the field. So they're going to be more partnerships with R&D, with HO medical team, and they're going to leverage each other's strengths to communicate and continue that continuum of expertise across the life cycle of the molecule. And with all these, I think there is going to be more ownership and more pride in what they're doing, the value they're creating, and it will take them to newer heights.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And a somewhat related question, but I think looking a little wider across the spectrum of medical affairs, what changes do you see coming for specific sub-functions like medical communications, publication planning, medical information?
Yeah, I think too, all sub-functions will essentially be impacted by these changes. And really the principles that are going to drive it are increasingly digital and increasingly personalized. So I think gone are the days where the sub-functions really just handle reactively inquiries or distribute broad communications, go and present broad scientific principles. I think what it's going to do is shape the contribution of each sub-function to the strategy. So in scientific communications, it's going to be about how do we respond to an increasingly personalized need of the doctor and the patient to provide a rapid cycle return of that information back into the field. So I see this strategy starting to affect all the sub-functions. I mean, if we think of pharmacovigilance and safety, we're going to see increasingly how data and big data is going to enable a more rapid understanding of where the safety developments are happening around a particular product. If we see MSLs, I think field medical, and just to pick up from what Maya was saying earlier, I think it's an enormous opportunity for field medical. They're going to become, I think, the most valuable function within the company, generating those insights and going back into the field and communicating value. And I think just to comment a little bit on value, I think value is really important to understand. If I go back 10 years, it was about communicating the phase 3 data well, or the phase 4 data well. But I think where the sub-function of field medical is going to become increasingly critical is how do they communicate more broadly, not just the science, but across medical, across the humanistic benefits and about the economic and social benefits. And I think that that's an important evolution for field medical that I think most companies are wrestling with how to execute around. But that's not going to go away. That's going to be increasingly important. So for me, the strategy is going to impact all of the sub-function and how they contribute to the higher level strategy over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, great, thank you. We had a question just come in. This is for Dr. Maya Sharma. Can you share some suggestions how we can generate real-world evidence in countries like India, where there could be less uniform database that some other markets may have, but there may be large linked national healthcare insurance databases?
I would agree to that. That in spite of the sheer size of the population, despite being India one of the biggest generic manufacturer, that means there is a lot of awareness. When it comes to data, we have not really been up there. So it is the time that we need to realize its importance, and I think it's now on the shoulders of the medical affairs leaders to make the organizations realize its importance. There are products, there are molecules which have been existing in Indian markets, say for the last 20 or 30 years, and still, there is not much India-specific data available on them. So that is why today we need to design real-world evidence studies and highlight that talking about efficacy and safety is fine, but what other value propositions we can add up. Can we extend, to say a different population today, do that study? Because if we talk about pregnancy, lactation, children, elderly, these kind of patient subsets, we know that in typical clinical trials, these patient populations are excluded. So can we go back to our doctors, to our KOLs out there in the clinical field and ask them that they are already prescribing these medications as per their clinical acumen to these subset of populations. So what have they realized? What has been the outcome in these patients? And then finally collect all this data and, help the organization in kind of a, I would say, label extension, subset population extension like that, and highlight all this data, not just to the organization, but later, once you have collated this data, once you have run the advanced analytics on this, and you have some insights, again, we have to go back to the regulatory bodies and convince them on the same to recognize this. And, so this is how I would say nobody is going to guide us. It's not the commercial which is going to tell us what to do. It's the job of the medical affairs leaders to give directions on this front to everybody and generate more and more India-specific data. I mean, it's a pity, actually, after all these years, we are still talking about, we are mostly using, I mean, thanks to the US and European bodies, we India data, we have 1/6 of the world's population. And let's see how this population behaves. So we need to do that. High time to pull up the socks, jack up our game. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I think a question for both of you. Can you expand on how MSLs and other field medical team members can engage KOLs that they don't already have an established relationship with in a time when the email or the virtual format may be the most common way of communicating?
Okay, let me take up that question again. And again, I can do that with the experience because I've worked in HO medical as well as field medical. When we talk about field medical, there is no escape. You have to go through the grind. So let me tell you, I have heard all those remarks like it's a glorified medical representative kind of a job. But let me tell you, once you have gone through that grind and you have come out of it, establishing actual KOL relationships, and I can say that with full confidence, the medical teams which are just sitting out of head offices, they do right KOL engagement and management. But if you ask them to name 100 top KOLs, or whether the KOLs know them very well, I think they will start, people will be flabbergasted to know that it's just mentioned. But otherwise, when we talk about field medical, they are directly interacting with these KOLs, generating insights. There are times when the KOLs require any data and they will not turn to head office, but they will turn to these field medical people to ask for the data, discuss data. And again, for specific population, they'll ask whether it will work, whether it will have more side effects or not. So once you have established a rapport with the KOLs, then it is all smooth sailing. So that is why you can take no shortcuts. You have to wait for the doctor initially unless you have made that rapport. You have to be really high on science. You need to understand when you're talking about specialist and super specialist, you have to acquire that kind of a knowledge. So it should not be related just to your product, but the whole domain area, the whole therapy area. So that whenever doctors tosses any question regarding the therapy area or its connection with, or concurrent usage with any other medication, you should be able to answer. That is when the doctor is going to respect you. That is when they are going to embrace your product. So yes, one, you have to be very regular in visiting your doctors and making up that KOL connect. And secondly, yes, it has to be increasingly virtual now because of the kind of times we are into, and also because it will save time and money. So both. So I would say it has to be a mix up of whenever it is possible face to face. And secondly, it has to be more digital, virtual, online, or whatever it is. And there are new tools, which we are having these days, like, even ACMA has these kind of tools, and there are different systems which medical affair organizations are already using, like a Viva system kind of a thing. So those have to be used to monitor our working and to give shape to the strategy, medical strategy in the field.
Okay, all right. To both of you, quite often we find interest and unmet medical need in specific patient populations. However, there might not be a large population, and hence it might not have, it might not make broad commercial sense to extensively support such an investigator-initiated research. What do you suggest? How can we translate this idea or this request for a smaller patient population, for a focus on smaller patient population, and convert that into reality?
Yeah, I think my comment on that would be, I think one thing that isn't going to change is the strategy that we need to have in place around a particular technology or molecule, and we need to know internally what areas we are interested in terms of evolving the knowledge and evidence base. We're not going to be able to invest in everything. And I think that's the reality. I think we have to be good internally at working out where and what patient subpopulations we're going to have the biggest impact. And we need to stay true to that with the strategies. So I think part of my sort of reaction would be, we're not going to be able to do everything. I mean, at the same time, we do have to be an advocate for the patient. We need to be an advocate for our doctors. And so we need to balance that, but recognize in the end, we can't invest in everything.
Yeah, I second that. At times we do say that, the job of medical affairs is stick to science and increase the scientific credibility, in the eyes of the stakeholders. But at the same time, until unless you have that, the muscle power, until unless you have that resources to actually invest in rare diseases, you can't go all out and keep investing and talking about science. Yes, ultimately it has to make some commercial sense.
Great, thank you. Dr. Sharma, you touched on this question a bit before. What is really the fundamental differences you see going forward between, say, biopharma and the medical device industry?
Yeah. Okay, so what are the major differences? Okay, so what I have seen is typically if you talk about the team size is much smaller in medical devices, and the revenue generation is much higher. Compared to that, pharma, obviously, because there have to be more touch points and more communication data points in pharma, we require bigger team sizes. The same is applicable not just to the sales and marketing, but to medical affairs team as well. Interestingly, medical has been a lot more involved in a marketing strategy and business development in medical devices, which we are yet to witness in pharma. So medical devices have been asking for doctors with MBA degrees, and you see a lot of product managers. Because see, if doctors who understand, the medicines, who understand the patient-centric approach, if we are not going to contribute in the hardcore strategy, because typically a therapy area strategy or a product strategy is considered the domain, the ownership is taken up by the marketing team. But then what I'm trying to say is that since medical has the knowledge, it also now is being equipped with all the technological advances. If they just, kind of have a bit of marketing knowledge and understanding of business, then they can actually contribute in an excellent manner as far as marketing business development is concerned. So that's how maybe we can see this, if this model can work in pharma as well for us.
Okay, great, thank you. As one of the keys for future success that we touched on are the soft skills. What do you see as the most essential soft skills for both external, but also importantly, internal, specifically commercial engagement?
Yeah. Yes, I think this is a critical question because I actually believe out of all the challenges that we've been talking to during this presentation, this is probably the one that's most important to get right as we move into the future. The soft skills are everything internally and externally. I would look, there are a number. I think I would pick 3 or 4. Number one, communication and a knowledge of behavior. And I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, ever since I started in the industry, we've kind of said there's nothing we can do about compliance, and that is patient adherence to treatment and the schedules. There's nothing we can do about it. And again, we invest and we don't make any positive impact. I think what we're actually going to have to move on from that as an industry, develop the skills necessary to do that. And that means the softer skills around understanding patient behaviors and doctor behaviors and how we can fundamentally change them. I think that's going to be absolutely critical. Partnership internally and externally, and integration skills. And that means collaboration and communication. This sense of integration and partnership, I think, is a big shift. It isn't going to be about scientific knowledge. It's going to be about how we can engage internally and integrate around a common strategy and understand what it is we need to do to shape opinions. I think that last one I'd just pull out as well, shaping opinions. It isn't just about communicating data, it's shaping opinions. I would pick those. I actually think that as a follow-on to this webinar, I would have a dedicated webinar focused just on soft skills evolution for medical affairs professionals over the next few years, because I think we could really get into this.
Sounds like a great topic.
Yep.
I think this question was for you, Dr. Tennyson, off of one of your previous comments. What changes do you see coming in the way medical strategy is determined?
Yeah, I think, yes. So I think the internal process is going to become much more important. I think, if I go back years, the medical plan would be developed separately. Increasingly, as we move forward, the plan is going to have to be developed in a very integrated way so that the strategy is common across the functions. And then the medical plan down the level of execution is developed by the medical team. So that is going to drive a lot of strategic planning process change. It's going to require more leadership from medical affairs staff, and it's going to need an ability to speak up internally. I think it's all too often, I mean, a lot of us in medical are much more introverted than our commercial colleagues, so our voices tend not to get heard to the same degree. I think what we're going to have to do to enable that enhanced strategic planning process is be much better at speaking up and advocating a perspective, collaborating, integrating, and hearing advice and input, but then owning the plan that we put together. That, I think, is also goes back to the last question, is around the softer skills of speaking up and being heard. I think is going to be incredibly important. So it's a step up for medical, a big step up. And I think part of the message from this webinar is it is a big step up. And we all need to prepare ourselves for that step up and make sure we own our career plan and drive internally HR, drive our managers, so that we have the education, we have the training, we have the internal exposure to enable us to do that. And you know, that internal exposure to senior leadership is very important. It's often one of the most development shaping things we have in our career. And so really own that opportunity and make sure it's integrated into your plan, how you get that exposure. So I've covered a few things there, but.
I would just like to add up, you know, from a completely practical standpoint, so we know that there is a products and company strategy, so which the CEO shares in the annual meetings. So those are then further subdivided into the BUs and the medical and regulatory, marketing, sales, training functions, etc. Within medical, we have to see then whether it's a generic company or it's an original research molecule company, and accordingly, whatever departments that we have within medical, HO medical, field medical, R&D, evidence generation and publications teams, medical information services, PVG team, etc. So basis that, we have to further divide the task and make up a strategy so that we are maximizing the potential of all these functions, right? And basis this, we devise actually the KRA and KPIs, so that at the end of the year, we can do the performance assessment, increments, promotion, etc. So overall, when we talk about medical strategy, you have to see what kind of organization it is, what kind of medical team exists, also what kind of therapeutic area molecule it is, whether it is a new launch which is happening, whether it's a completely new therapy area that you're working into. So which stage you are in, a new launch or is it an established product? In case of new launches, we are going to go for more global standards, similar processes, protocols, and communication, so that we can create that value proposition from a medical's end. In case of established products, when we know that country-wise there are change in regulations, indications, patient populations, the generic versions or the kind of competition which is existing in a country, depending upon the local needs and demands. So that's how we work on, whether we are now talking about adaptability to deliver faster results, what's the efficacy, so that ways, there are a lot of parameters we have to consider before determining the medical strategy.
Great.
I think one other element I'll just comment on is the patient perspective. And I would see, I think all companies can do this better. There needs to be an initiative and a slide or a few slides in the strategy that create clarity around what the patient perspective is. We all think we know what it is, but actually we've got to talk to them, and we've got to bring that to the strategic planning table. And there's got to be slides in the deck that address that. I think that patient perspective and patient insight focus is an evolution in strategic planning that we need to ensure that happens.
Very good. And I do want to recognize that we have just about 5 minutes left, and we have many more questions And please do submit your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will follow up with answers afterwards. In these last few minutes, I wanted to ask just a couple more questions that have come in. What are the KPIs that you recommend for medical leadership assessment, both from the medical affairs team perspective and from the company perspective?
Okay, so I'll take that first. As I just talked about, once we are introspecting on the kind of organization we are and the kind of medical affairs team model that we have, depending upon that, the KRAs and the KPIs will change. So obviously, it has to involve targets, which are very, very important. If we're talking about field medical, it has to be targets in terms of the doctor meetings, how many QL engagement options have been generated, the number of CMEs. Importantly, what are the outcomes of those CMEs, which is purely in terms of science, right? Here we are not talking about any kind of commercial interest. It's purely science that we're talking about. And then how many opportunities we are generating for the real world evidence, what kind of insights we are generating, whether those insights were actionable and led to some kind of change within the organization, the change in organizational strategy, and or whether the data is leading to the change in the government or the regulatory body regulations on how we are treating these patients. It also has to be a lot in terms of training. So whether we are training our internal stakeholders or outside the external stakeholders, or we are ourselves taking up that training, because we have to also keep evolving. We have artificial intelligence and machine learning and big data, blockchain in healthcare. So are we actually understanding, what is in store for us and how can we leverage these new technologies and tools, for, I would say, maximizing the potential of our organizations and the medical affairs function. So this also has to be put up, in the KPIs, and then accordingly the KRAs have to be generated as well. So again, I would quickly say, so it has to be the targets on whatever tasks you are doing, training, evidence, and the overall change in terms of outcomes that you're making. So all these have to be put in the KPIs.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I endorse that. I think the KPIs depend in the end on the strategy and the capability developed to execute on the strategy. And that turns into a framework of quantitative and qualitative KPIs. And I think, I don't think the medical affairs function needs to be afraid of KPIs. I think we have to be afraid of poorly putting together the framework that articulates the value that medical affairs brings. And I don't think we've been very good at that in the past. So that will continue to evolve as a skill, but it's not something that medical affairs needs to fear, because I think part of the new leadership for medical is not being afraid to proactively speak up and communicate the value that we bring. I think, you see, my sense is that KPIs are going to continue to evolve until the industry gets very good at being able to measure and communicate the patient outcome, real patient outcomes in the real world, and real patient experience, and the impact we're having, the number of patients that we impact. And I think we're still evolving that skill. But at the heart of KPIs is just that. Everything else is a surrogate marker of us getting there. So I don't think we should lose sight of that. I think KPIs we need that reflect the patient experience, the improvement, the number of patients we impact, patient outcomes, not just at the broad population level, but almost down to the level of the individual clinic. I think is really important. So it's medical departments need to have experts in KPIs because they are important internally, but they're also important externally, so that we communicate in an increasingly personalized way with our doctors and patients.
Great, thank you. And one final question for our live event. What's your opinion on the on the comparison and kind of co-positioning of medical affairs leadership with R&D leadership and commercial leadership? And I think this maybe goes back to the kind of bridge builder role.
Yes, my perspective on that is that it's the rightful place for medical affairs to sit. It's this third seat of the stool. I've got a lot of work in market access, and market access is very important, critical. And I think also that, in my time in market access, a lot of what we were trying to do was actually better executed through the medical affairs organization. And so I think there has been evolution, and companies will vary where they are on this. Evolution in terms of some of the market access engagement activities, increasingly, and I'm thinking patient advocacy, advocacy relations, increasingly enabled and executed through the medical affairs function. But I think that transition is enabling medical affairs to take its rightful seat at the table, I think, as the bridge. And I think the other perspective on that is that it's a rightful place to sit because it's always been missing from the industry. I mean, ever since I joined, we've talked about how do we bridge this focus in development on the pivotal study and clinical trial populations, and they're not resembling the real world population, and they don't resemble what payers really want to pay for. So medical affairs kind of owning that space is very logical. They are the logical holder of that space. And the emergence of medical affairs as that bridge, I think, is overdue. But it needs medical affairs to own it and step up and articulate it. And if we don't, others will take it. And I think that's where we've been. And I think for the future, medical affairs needs to be there and own it.
Yeah, I second again Mark on that. When we talk about R&D and medical affairs, it requires different set of capabilities. So when we talk about R&D, it is more of the clinical trials. But for medical affairs, it is important to communicate those clinical trials in a manner which is going to be, the same language, whether we are talking about the doctors or the other stakeholders. So we are bridging the gap, but it is that, the medical affairs person has to have a good soft skills, good communication skills, and they should know how to impart that knowledge or the evidence which has been generated. So it is, I would say, a little more dynamic kind of a profile. We have much more stakeholders as compared to R&D. So a stakeholder management is important as well. R&D does not need to kind of interact with many stakeholders. They just have to focus on their work, their research. But for us, besides the science, besides communicating that science, stakeholder management again takes an important place.
Very good. Thank you both so much. This has been a very, very interesting conversation with a lot of great insights, a lot of great questions. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the next part of our webinar series. Dr. Tennyson, Dr. Sharma, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone, please have a good day. Please have a safe day. And we look forward to having you joining us again soon.